Hello and welcome to Anglo-Irish Astro Geeks. It is June. It is 30 degrees over out there. Yeah. But anyway, to business. We have an old friend of the show. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Nick Vetz, FRAS.
I'm Susan McKeown, FORAS, and I also do some work for Astronomy Ireland.
You want me to introduce myself? Okay, yeah. I don't remember what the protocol is. So I'm Herb Baker. I live in Houston, Texas, in the U.S. Of course, near the Johnson Space Center, where I grew up and worked for many years. I'm retired from NASA now after 42 years working in the business office. Worked on the Space Shuttle, Space Station, Orion programs, and now I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League. So I'm staying involved in what goes on. In fact, we just had our monthly Alumni League board meeting on site at JSC a couple of days ago. Yeah, so that should be enough for me.
Oh, great.
The last time we spoke, we were discussing Skylab, and we touched on the parasol. It's interesting that about 2 months ago, I was a participant in a online event, which was chronicling the story of Skylab, and you showed us a photograph of a young lady stitching the emergency parasol. I'm thinking, I know that photograph. I know the people in the photograph. And the first thing I thought about was your chat with us. Of course, the person we had discussing it didn't really know as much as you, which was sad. But then again, but I was thinking it's been a year or so, but Skylab is still dominating people's thoughts. It's still in people's mind. It set initial records to be broken.
Yes.
It showed that low Earth orbit habitats were feasible. It was a great use of Apollo program hardware that was still around and basically sitting around doing nothing. Brilliant idea, including the fact it used a Saturn booster to actually become the body of the space station after all the propellant had gone. So it really showed the enthusiasm it was the Nixon era, wasn't it? It was Nixon
era, I believe so. Yes.
And of course, his contribution was the space shuttle. But I still think this is a personal opinion. I still think he should have allowed those last Apollo missions to go, because now with Artemis we are retracing Apollo 17. Sadly 18, 19 and 20 were cancelled. They would have gone to different parts of the moon, more technical missions because of the actual terrain that they were going to encounter. And over 50 years later, Artemis has brought back the lunar program. We have CIS Lunar Gateway coming. And of course, there's already, according to some of the intelligence I've seen, a 4G a 4G cell network been set up on the moon. Obviously, it's a test bed. Can we use cellular equipment on the moon? Answer, yes, because it's basically its line of sight. So you find a nice vantage point in the highlands, set it up, and then you can use smartphones, etc., to talk amongst yourselves if you're astronauts and you're in various different locations. Will we go to the far side of the moon? I will not call it the dark side of the moon, because that is just wrong.
That's right.
Even though Pink Floyd had a brilliant album called that, it is not strictly scientific. But yeah, we are now going to do what the last 3 Apollos would have done and more. We're going to go back. We're going to live there. It's part of Push to Mars, a sane pathway to Mars. I've had this argument with other people. I think Susan was there for one of the discussions, if not both of them, with one of our
That was definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, and of
So
course,
yeah, Skylab is 50 years as well. I mean,
Yeah.
it's absolutely, it just keeps going and people are still fascinated. I was only reading about it last week. So, I mean, it's great to have you on. Be an honor to listen to anything you have to say about it.
I think one of the things that we need to state is that there were things that went wrong. One of the solar panels tried to deploy during launch and was subsequently ripped off. We had the sunshade lost. But if anything, those minor details taught us a lot about providing and living in low Earth orbit habitats. If not for the problems that Skylab faced, it is, to my mind, the fact it means that we had ideas, we knew how to work around first like a bad situation. It could have been just written off at that point, but everybody said no, we can fix it. We have an alternative power source from the telescope, and we can fix a new sunshade, and it was done. So this is where we should start, because we only briefly touched on it. So would you like to tell us more about the parasol?
Yeah, so we were talking about how warm it is where we both live, and I was going to tell a story about how it was my mother, who was the seamstress sitting at the sewing machine, who sewed the parasol. It was 22 feet by 24 feet, made of aluminized mylar and ripstop nylon, and I'm not even sure what that is, but it was very thin and had a very reflective side. And so I remember, and of course I was 20 years old at the time, and as I was mentioning, we didn't have air conditioning in our home, and so I remember her bringing home some scraps of that material that was being used as a sun shield, and we put it in our windows at home. And so, you know, it occurred to me, we're probably the only home in the neighborhood that had Skylab parasol material in the windows of our home. I don't know if it helped or not, but
did it work? Yeah, I just did it work?
Right. Yeah, and so yeah, we're talking about Skylab here, and of course I've got my movie poster behind me, prominently hanging on the wall. And so it was the 50th anniversary in May of the Skylab 1 launch, and then the Skylab 2 launch of the first crew. And so there are a few celebrations around the country, certainly near the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and we also had one here in Houston at the Space Center Houston. And we had 3 or 4 panels, and I was asked to moderate one of the panels. And my 3 panelists, astronaut Story Musgrave, who was one of only 2 astronauts to fly in space 6 times, John Young being the other, and he's the only astronaut to fly on all 5 space shuttles. And so that was interesting having him on the panel. And then also had a Dr. Helen Lane, who was a nutritionist. We're talking about food, and former flight director, Bill Reeves. And so I started the panel because a lot of people, of course, a lot of people weren't even alive back in 1973. But most people, I think, don't remember that at that time, the longest amount of time that humans had spent in space was 22 days. About a year earlier, the Russians or Soviets had sent one of their crews, I don't remember, Salyut 11 or something like that,
Right.
into space, and they spent 22 days there. And when they landed back on Earth, they were dead. And so what had happened, it wasn't because of anything to do with being in microgravity or zero gravity. They had a problem with their spacecraft, and a leak happened as they were coming home, and the capsule depressurized and they died of asphyxiation. But the US space program didn't know that at first. The Soviets took a little while before they finally explained why they had died. And so, you know, putting yourself back in that time frame, to think that no humans had spent more than 3 weeks in space, And here we were going to be sending our first crew up for 28 days. And so anyway, it was, comforting to know, it was a terrible accident, but comforting to know that humans could survive at least 3 weeks in space. And then, of course, the first Skylab crew spent 28 days there, and the second crew was only going to spend 56 days there, but they ended up spending 59 days. And actually, one of my favorite jokes about the Skylab program, I'll tell it now if this is a good time.
Yes.
So Jack Lausma, who's a friend of mine, and I went to school with his daughter, and they were at the Space Center Houston event last month. And I've heard him tell this story many times. And so again, they had only planned to stay 56 days, which was twice the 28 days that the first crew spent. But they realized that if they came home after 56 days, the orbits would put their splashdown in the South Pacific 1,000 miles west of San Diego. And if they waited 3 more days, that the time they splashed down in South Pacific would only be about 300 miles from San Diego, which was much better than 1,000 miles. So they agreed to spend that extra 3 days there. And of course, Jack talks a lot about, hey, we had just set the record for most time in space, and I wanted to stay even longer. But anyway, the problem was that with the clothing, they had some coveralls, I think they called them, and they wore those for a week and then threw them in the trash. And they had underwear, enough for a change every 2 days. So that seemed to be fine. They were happy with that. But the problem was at the end of the 56 days, they were out of underwear. Jack called them skivvies.
Skivvies.
And so they contacted Mission Control and said, hey guys, we've got an issue or problem here. Any suggestions on what to do about this? And so the Mission Control folks said, well, we'll get back to you shortly. So they called them back and they said, well, guys, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is you're going to get to change underwear. The bad news is, Jack, you change with Alan. Alan, you change with Owen. And Owen, you change with Jack.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, that cracked up the audience when I told that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did kind of solve the problem, just thinking outside the box. But they didn't solve the problem; they just made it workable. But that's brilliant. I'm sure they did a great laugh with that.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things was how even on Skylab 1, they were able to record the temperature drop from initially boarding and deploying the parasol until it actually got to a livable temperature finally. And also the fact that they managed to show that even with it being above average temperatures, which was not ideal, they could still work. And more importantly, it didn't affect the science that was being done, which was basically how long can humans survive in low Earth orbit, really. They were able to demonstrate effectively sleeping, doing ablutions. I'm going to use that word because it's a lot politer. And of course, eating and doing the medical science, which was the really important stuff, because even 50 years on, that medical science is what's going to underpin return to the moon and eventually going to Mars. So Skylab really, even though von Braun had already set out prior to the Apollo program how you could go to Mars already, and that was off the back of the Saturn V and the Saturn 1Bs. But he proved through the program that humans could survive in space for protracted periods of time. And at the end of the day, again, the problems the crews had showed really just how ingenuitive they could be and how humans could overcome adversity in situations having a far less optimal space station. And they had to juggle the power sufficiently in order to complete the experiments. And the Apollo telescope was one of the prime important experiments. It kind of really paved the way for a lot of what happens on the ISS today. And of course, people just don't I think because there's this thing about, oh, we never really went to the moon, it was a Hollywood soundstage, that there's a lot of people who don't want to believe in Skylab or anything else since. They even mock the idea that the shuttles flew and they went to Earth orbit. Most of them today finally accept the ISS. But a lot of the biomedical data was purely off the backs of the 3 Skylab teams and what they could do and what they did given what was going on.
Oh, they were absolute pioneers. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure we would have an ISS today if not from what we learned on Skylab. In fact, another thing we talked about on my panel, one of the panelists I mentioned, Bill Reeves, who was a flight director.
You did it recently, didn't you?
Yes. He before he became a flight director, he was involved on Skylab kind of tangentially. He was working in Earth resources, and so what they would do was Skylab's up, whatever 250 miles above the Earth, and when it would be passing over somewhere in the United States, they would send a high altitude aircraft that with very good photo capabilities, and then have people on the ground. So they were kind of 3 levels of coverage. So Skylab taking photos, the high altitude aircraft taking photos, and then people actually on the ground, so they would know what was actually they were taking pictures of. So it took a lot of coordination for all of them to be at the same place. But anyway, that kind of thing, satellites and taking pictures of the Earth from high altitudes is what eventually got us Google Earth.
Yes.
And so lots of things came from Skylab like that.
Well, it's ironic. I think this is probably, sorry, I'll put it over here. This is the one thing the space program truly gave us.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because the cameras here came from several different programs. Some of them a little less well known than others, but early charge coupled devices were only able to be used because the military provided the tech to the space agency for civilian use, for the imaging satellites and for astronomical research. So really, in fact, this is actually a child of Apollo, purely because without it, we wouldn't have computers the size we have today.
Well, and of course, I'm sure you've heard this, the computing power of what you were just holding in your hand is much greater than what they flew to the moon with. On Apollo.
Yeah, something like 512 bytes or something.
Yes, something amazingly small. Yes.
But it was absolutely cutting edge at the time, so it just shows how quickly we've moved. Yes. I think our momentum is just growing and growing with everything. Nearly getting to a scary momentum at the moment with AI and everything else. But Herb, you were kind enough earlier to tell me that you're writing your own memoir, and I would love to hear any details you're willing to share. And I can't wait to read it. Absolutely can't wait.
Well, thank you. Yes, I finally, even before I retired, because I acknowledge that I feel very lucky to have been able to experience the things I've experienced, and had a job with NASA for over 40 years, and grew up here just a few miles from a NASA center, and went to middle school. I was on the middle school football team for 3 years with the sons of Scott Carpenter and Frank Borman, and all through high school, and it's still friends today. So anyway, people were telling me, you need to write a book, and I thought, yeah, sure. I mean, that's something I've never thought about, and certainly not because I want to become a famous author or anything like that. But and so then after I retired, and so actually I remember telling a few people, well, maybe when I retire, I'll think about it. And so then I retired, and I became so busy, involved. I'm a theater actor. I'm still on the board of directors for my local theater. I'm an officer on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League. I volunteer for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation and Space Center Houston. And so anyway, so then the pandemic happened, right? And I had a few other projects I wanted to get out of the way. And so I kept putting it off, and I thought, okay, I don't really have a good excuse anymore. So I started it. And again, I didn't know what I'm doing. Just kind of learning on my own, just kind of typing things out and trying to remember people and places and stories. And so anyway, fast forward 3 years into the pandemic now, and it's kind of hit and miss, but I've really made more progress in the last month or so than I had in the previous 2 years, because I got some software that was Scrivener, specifically made for helping to write books and organizing it and keeping notes and comments and things. And so I'm at 14,000 words now.
Oh, wow.
Which, and I'm shooting for about 50 or 60,000.
Yeah.
So I'm about a third, fourth or a third of the way there. The interesting thing that just occurred to me the other day, though, I was telling somebody about that, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not even to the part yet where I started my NASA job. This is all just growing up, again, with the.
There could be a trilogy.
With the astronauts kids and covering the I think I probably mentioned last time that I had a temporary job with the TV networks, ABC TV, covering Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13, and even a couple of the Skylab missions, working on site at NASA. And then again, my mother's work on Skylab. And so that's the first 14,000 words. And so I haven't even started my NASA career yet, but I'm feeling much better about it. I think. And so what I'm going to call it is my, idea at this point, and it may change, is from Apollo to Artemis, because certainly involved in Apollo, at least covering it for the news and living in the community.
Yeah.
And I've had at least a little bit to do with Artemis. I worked on the Orion.
Yeah.
And then I was invited I got to watch the launch of Artemis 1 in mission control. Was invited by the NASA Johnson Space Center director to watch it there. And then I went on site for the viewing of the splashdown at the end of the mission. They showed it in the auditorium, and at Johnson Space Center. And so I got to go there and see that with, 500 people who had actually worked on the program too. So that was kind of fun. And anyway, I'm and the timing is such, really couldn't be better. Even if it takes me till the end of the year, about the time if the book comes out, maybe we'll be getting close to launching Artemis 2. So
That's
maybe of interest to people.
Absolutely.
Last I heard, Artemis 2 was due to launch November for circling Luna to go around the moon and come back with a crew.
But that's November of next year, though, 2024.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Is it 2024? Oh, my mistake. Yeah. Okay.
Because basically, at the moment, what they're doing with Artemis is they're going through everything.
Yeah.
The next rocket is pretty much built. And it's really a case of, at the moment, Susan, is that they're actually going through every piece of data they've got.
Yeah.
Because as I remember, and I could be wrong on this, at the end of the day, even though there were still some issues on the Artemis launch, the head of NASA authorized a go regardless, even though it was supposed to be a technical hold, because there was still a leak, propellant leak, I believe, which is fine. It's an unmanned rocket. At the end of the day, it has to launch, because otherwise you don't get the hard data. To be able to say, well, the next one we can man rate, because we've seen X, Y, and Z was wrong with this first one. Now we know what to do to fix it. These rockets are plumbing. They're really a plumber's dream in a lot of cases. Saturn V certainly was. I'm looking at that engine. It is purely plumbing, and that is it. Maybe half the country's plumbers to start building up the engines for Artemis.
That's
That'll
what
get
I'm,
big.
yeah, that's
But
what
it
amazes
is.
me. When I look at the, at the Johnson Space Center and what we call a rocket park, we have a Saturn V laid out horizontally, and it's broken into pieces, and so you can see that plumbing between the stages, and I just stand there staring at it, and oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's just, how does anyone figure all of that out? And and it all has to work, and it's
Yeah.
mind blowing to look at that, as you call it, the plumbing. It's just amazing, and that was in the 1960s.
Yeah, well, the thing is with the SRBs, that's a solid propellant.
Mhm.
It's built in two parts with O-rings
Mhm.
to secure one propellant from another.
Yeah.
So that's fairly simple. To be honest, we use it in missiles. It's missile technology, really. That's what an SRB is. It's just a missile. It's repurposed.
Mhm.
But for a spaceship, for a rocket that's going to take somebody, you can't use solid propellant in the stages. Even with the liquid hydrogen and oxygen, you're sitting on the mother of all bombs.
Right.
And
Right.
really, the whole point of the piping is it puts a predetermined amount of both in the right place at the right time. And the only way you can do that is with electrics and with valves,
Mhm.
pure and simple.
Yeah.
And the space shuttle engine itself, the main engine in the shuttle, was very similar.
Yeah.
And if in fact they actually are reusing space shuttle
Yes.
engine technology on Artemis, which is good.
Using the actual engines, in
Yeah.
fact. Yeah, not just the technology, but yeah.
Well, it's good in a lot of respects because it's refurbished, reused. It's not just scrapping stuff.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and I
they've
mean,
been very reliable.
Yeah.
yeah, probably literally built so well it'll stand the test of time. And I mean, it's, again, it goes back to recycling. I know that's a very basic thing, but that's what everybody should be doing with everything, anything reusable. It's great to know that they're doing that, actually.
Mhm.
But we haven't really stood still. Yes, we've gone back to an older idea, the vertical stack, but the vertical stack allows us to punch more tonnage into orbit. And I suspect once SLS really gets into the swing of things, it will be punching up payloads to build further space stations. Certainly be launching CIS components.
Right.
Because it's the only the way where it really competes against Falcon is low Earth orbit only, and SLS is capable of going into high Earth orbit and beyond.
Yes.
It's they've taken the lessons from Apollo
Mhm.
and reapplied them in a new rocket. It's even more in size and power than the Saturn V. They rival the Saturn V.
Yeah.
So we've taken from Brahms' dream, we built on it, and we're using everything we've learned throughout the program. Even repurposing the Mercury missiles, Redstone missiles, to put a man into space was a brilliant step. And I think this is what a lot of people forget. Space travel or getting there is stepping stones. So the companies out there today are building on everything that NASA learned from the mid-50s going forward. And that was the only way Kennedy's dream of putting a man on the moon before the end of the decade in the 60s could be done.
Mhm.
You literally took, okay, so this is an ICBM. However, take off the warhead, put on a capsule,
Mhm.
we could put a man in orbit with it. It has that capability.
Mhm.
Then we moved to Gemini. Again, we took a missile, repurposed it, put a capsule on it, learned a heck of a lot more. We learned how to do rendezvous and docking in space,
Right.
which was, if you can't do that, you're not going to get to the moon. You can't even get to a space station. So the Agitator 2 body proved how you can dock into space, transfer personnel to the LEM or to a space station, and then bring them home. In fact, everybody carps on about Armstrong's mishaps with the agitator. If anything, he proved that the human frame can take a heck of a lot of abuse, because normally by rights, the role that the Gemini went into in the end would black out the crew completely. But he was able to show that humans can deal with it, they can fight back. He brought it back to stability using the RCS system. That was the end of the mission. As soon as they fired the RCS, that was it. That was it. No bets, all bets off, got to come home. Even though he was actually quite miserly with the RCS usage, he could have done and completed the mission. But Capcom erred on the side of caution. No, you fired it, you got to come home. So we proved an awful lot, which again paid out in Skylab. It paid out in the Apollo Soyuz link up. We took the Apollo command module and capsule. We built an adapter. We linked up with the Soyuz rocket, with the Soyuz capsule in space. And to be honest, we built the next big bridge in space. The Skylab, we proved we can go 56 and further days on with each crew. Then we had the other missions. We had Mir and the European Space Agency having its crew. I wonder what would have happened and how far Skylab could have gone if there hadn't have been the solar flare, which expanded the atmosphere, caused the drag, which was the untimely demise of Skylab.
Right, and because shuttle was late.
Shuttle was late. It could have boosted Skylab higher, which was the intention.
That was the plan. Yeah.
So it could have continued on. It could have been refurbished in orbits. It could have eventually, perhaps, even formed a part of the ISS. We'll never know now.
No, but obviously every mistake is something to learn by, and that's what you do. I mean, nobody wants stuff like that to happen, but when they do, it does kind of propel everything and everyone along. And I think mistakes are the real birth of any kind of new idea, you know. So unfortunately, they're an absolute necessity in all types of life.
Well, you know, another thing we talked about on my Skylab panel just a few weeks ago was spacewalks, and how, you know, there were spacewalks during, I don't think they did any in Mercury, but Gemini and Apollo certainly, even on the moon, but even going there and back and retrieving film from some of the canisters and such, you know, on the way there and back. But they were all, except when they actually walked on the moon, they were attached by an umbilical. And same thing at Skylab, which made it kind of difficult, actually. And in fact, the only reason they were able to go outside, well, I say maybe not the only reason, but the reason it was as easy as it was to get outside was because they had an airlock there that they intended to use to go retrieve film from, you know, the Apollo telescope.
Right.
Otherwise, when they went out to free that solar array and to put up the second parasol or twin pole, they called it. They also did a spacewalk for that. I'm not sure how more difficult it would have been to get outside to do those things if they hadn't had that airlock there. That was intended only originally to be used to go retrieve film, and other things like with the umbilical. Of course, they were limited in how far they could go, and actually also another thing people didn't think about, there were no handrails because they weren't thinking they were going to be going outside and doing a spacewalk around all of those things, and so that kind of thing made that repairing, fixing, you know, deploying that one solar array even more difficult than it would have been. And so those were again some of the things that we learned about spacewalks. You know, we need a you know a self-contained like they walked on the moon, you know, just for spacewalks, not just for landing on another planet. And so, you know, they developed the extravehicular mobility unit, and you know, self-contained and not tied down with an umbilical. So you know,
well, also they were using Apollo era spacesuits, so even transiting an airlock would have been difficult. So yeah, the umbilical did make it a lot easier purely because they didn't have a backpack with
Yes.
all their equipment on board to get through.
Yes.
And of course, I suppose they could have disconnected the command module and gone out through the hatch that way, but that would have
Yeah,
been
I'm sure there would have been another way somehow, but I'm not sure what it was. Yeah.
It made it a bit easier to have that. Yeah.
And of course, looking at Orion is literally the direct descendant of the Apollo command module and capsule. The only difference is it's bigger. It can take more people. Mind you, having said that though, on the one that sat on the pad on the Saturn 1B as the rescue ship, they stripped everything out. They could have got two people plus the Skylab crew on board for the safe return very, very easily. It would have been very difficult. It would have been literally having people's feet resting on you for one of them, because that was it's still a very cramped area.
Yeah.
But they took the design and looked at it and said, well, we can do this. And they did it. A Saturn 1B sat for every launch to Skylab, every time Skylab was manned, there was one sitting there on the pad, ready to go at a moment's notice. And I'm pretty sure most of the checklists would have been simply just ripped up and said, right, let's get this rocket off the pad and get there. It's one of those things. That's the only time you can really do it. Otherwise, you do your checklists, then they'll disconnect the umbilical to the rocket, and then they can launch. But it showed that everything had been meticulously planned out, purely because they knew that they couldn't afford to lose an astronaut, particularly with Apollo 1 still in everybody's memory.
Yeah.
And I still think to this day, Gene Kranz at that grilling had it completely and utterly right. What would they have wanted? They would have wanted us to go. Yes, we had to learn lessons, but all three of them would not want their deaths to be a waste by emasculating the program and losing the space race.
Oh yeah, no doubt in my mind, as many astronauts as I've got to work with and know and become friends with over years, they're not worried about dying. They wouldn't be where they are as an astronaut if they were concerned or worried about, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. They've gone past that. The thing that most astronauts fear, believe it or not, is letting down their crewmates. Yeah. That's their biggest fear, is they don't want to be the one that screws up their assignment and makes the mission fail because they didn't do their job well enough. And it's interesting to think that's much more of a fear to them than dying. Yeah,
they're more of a team. As a team, they're thinking as a team. They don't want to be the weak cog. They want to be the absolutely.
Yeah. That's what they worry about.
I just wanted. Sorry, I wanted to ask you, just to get back to your book, Herb. I presume you're writing it linear, as you did say. You've only gotten up to, you haven't even got to NASA yet. But will you be including your mother much in the book, or?
No, well, yeah, she's included. I mean, actually, that's an interesting point, because at first I thought, well, is this a biography or is it a memoir, as I call it? And I've decided, no, it's not a biography. I mean, in some ways, I guess it is, and it's my whole life, right? So, almost as long as I can remember. But it's not about my family. In fact, my wife and my two sons are all very private. You won't find them on unlike me, on social media. And so I think, first of all, they wouldn't want me to be telling their life story along the way, and so I definitely will include at least a few paragraphs of, certainly because about my mother's work on the parasol from Skylab, but that's about it, really.
Yeah. Sorry, Nick. I interrupted you.
That's okay. I was about to say, I think that was probably the strengths of the astronaut corps training, is that everybody could do everybody else's job.
That's right. and you have to do, on the space station, sometimes you have to be a doctor, or take blood, or you have to be a barber and give someone a haircut, and all kinds of other repairman to repair instruments that need to be worked on. So yeah, you have to be very flexible with all of the things you can do.
Well, as I remember, like I say, I could be wrong. One of the requirements of the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo era and Skylab era was, at the end of the day, you had to be an engineer, because basically you had to be capable of sitting there and say, this is what the problem, this is what's gone wrong. How am I going to fix it? I haven't got every tool in the book I would love to have. I've only got what you've given us. And I suppose really it was the Apollo 13 success and how they managed to make two completely different systems, one in the LEM, one in the capsule, meet together in order to scrub the air of carbon dioxide. Somebody sat down and must have said, hey, I've got duct tape. I got some plastic. I can do this. And I think that's what's probably missing is people like Buzz, Armstrong, they all had to be able to do this themselves. They had to know every inch, every nut and bolt in the system, including how the actual rocket engine systems work. You had to have it all up here, because once you're up there, you're the guy that's going to fix it. And this is a personal opinion. I think the one thing the shuttle took away was the fact that you could fix it in orbit. All right, or if a computer goes down, normally you just pull a board out, slam another one in, which is fine. But if you have a propulsion system issue, you've got to have the knowledge of how it actually works and what is where and how you're going to fix it. And I think this was something that the Apollo era really did have. And again, the fact that 3 guys went to a space station that was ailing and they fixed it. They've got the solar panel to release. It's a 0G environment. You can't just give it a good pull. That doesn't, you're going to get flying yourself. You have to know exactly what you're doing, how you're going to use your environment to fix the problem.
Yeah, of course, an interesting thing about though is that one of the 3 guys on that crew, Joe Kerwin, was a medical doctor. He was the first medical doctor to fly in space as an astronaut, and so obviously he had to know and he was one of the guys out there working on the release of the solar panel on the spacewalk, and so he obviously knew how to do other things too. But yeah, he was a medical doctor first of all.
Listen, sorry, I'll stop hogging all the conversation you're getting.
I know you wanted to mention you're promoting STEM as well, Herb. So I mean, love to hear about that too. It's a wonderful thing.
Did you say my book?
No, STEM.
Oh, STEM. Oh, okay, right.
Promoting that as well. So if you want to do some of the work you're doing with that, it'd be great to hear.
Well, yeah, just in the sense that, it's funny because I think, I was not a STEM person myself, right? Now, I was a business guy, and that's another long, interesting story about how did a business guy end up at NASA? Again, even growing up in that community, it never occurred to me. I thought everyone who worked there was an astronaut, scientist, or engineer or pilot or something like that.
Oh, business side to it as well. I mean, it is a working business too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It turns out that about 30% of NASA back then and even today are business, finance, HR, and then today social media and IT, and it takes a lot of people to run that place. But so anyway, but obviously I worked with scientists and engineers and doctors and astronauts for 42 years, and so I certainly understand how important STEM is. And so it turns out I'm not sure how intentional that was, but most of my life today post-retirement is in working with nonprofits that support STEM involvement in education. Again, certainly that's what the NASA Alumni League mainly does. That's what we do with the funds we get from membership dues. We annually provide funds to schools, and we provide some to Space Center Houston, where there's another Texas-based company called Girl Start, which is for, as the name implies, is focused on girls from like 7 to 14 to try to get them interested in STEM and let them know that, hey, this is for you too, not just for boys. Yep. And again, I mentioned Space Center Houston and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. I'm the patron of a UK STEM site called majortim.space. And we try to get, again, young kids. I mean, we're talking like 6 or 8 year olds to 12 to 13 year olds, expose them to speakers and projects and STEM kind of things. And so so it's kind of my life now, but boy, I'm really enjoying it. And I feel like it's something that I'm doing something positive for the world.
Oh, you certainly, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
In a lot of cases, it's these kids now who are getting into STEM who will be leading the exploration of the solar system.
Yeah.
Once they get the bug and they can see where they can go, they will build on what we're doing today with Artemis, with Orion, and it will be, even if it's their kids, they will be the ones to break out into the solar system and truly make it mankind's home. Mm-hmm. At the moment, we have one planet, but they have the ability within a generation or two, possibly, to actually take on the whole of the solar system and make it our home. Mm-hmm. So yeah, STEM is, I agree, very, very important. Get the kids hooked on science, maths, technology now, and when they're going through middle and high school, they will still be into it. And when they graduate and go to college or university, once they come out, even if they don't even go to university, leave college, they will go into the disciplines which will take us into the rest of the solar system. Mm-hmm. I think it's very, very important that we get kids of all ages into science at this particular point, particularly with the debunking of science by pseudoscience, which is terrible. The fact that you can have somebody who is an utter charmer on the internet tell people that we didn't go to the moon, it's CGI. Well, I got news for that guy or woman, whoever. There was no CGI back in the like 60s, early 70s. It didn't exist. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until the likes of certainly, I would say, Babylon 5, Star Trek, particularly Next Generation onwards, that CGI really became a household thing. Mm-hmm. But no, all the blame has to go to Capricorn 1. sorry guys, if you were involved in it, but it postulates that we didn't go to Mars. It was a Hollywood sound set. And when the command capsule burnt up, they had 3 astronauts they didn't know what they were going to do with, but they were already declared dead. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when we started getting a rise in pseudoscience. And okay, we couldn't go. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, given the fact we were in the middle of the Cold War at the time, China and Russia both had the ability to see exactly where their signals came. Mm-hmm. They could, and if it was from a Hollywood sound set, guess what? They would be screaming across the world's media.
Yes,
the Americans were doing a fast one, but they tracked our signals. They tracked the LEM as it descended to Tranquility Base, and every other mission. And eventually, when they started going into space stations, and we had important things like Soyuz Apollo, then it proved, why would they lie to protect us? I had to say us because being dual national, I'm also a US citizen as well as a British citizen.
Yeah.
So yeah, why would they lie in the middle of the Cold War when they needed every ounce of legitimacy on their side?
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the best arguments, actually. Yeah, they would have done just the opposite. They would have tried to expose it as much as possible.
Yeah,
they would have made headlines. They would have absolutely used it to their advantage. And
to be honest, they would have won the Cold War with soft power.
Yeah. Well, the way I've heard it too is that if you were trying to pull off a scam like that, it would be easier to just go ahead and go to the moon and keep that secret from for 50 years from 40,000 people who were involved in that program.
Yeah.
Well,
it seems like an awful lot of work. Yeah.
Given the size of NASA, and I'm pretty sure that the Russians and Chinese had their own people planted in the organization at the time. See, because even today, both Russia and China use the same docking collar that the West uses on the ISS. The current Chinese space station had it, certainly does have it, and it was adopted by Russia very, very quickly and very easily. There was no fight about who's going to set the docking protocol. It was automatically, we will go with the NASA protocol. It is the best one. So everybody can dock with each other's space stations if they really have to. And interestingly, I know this is fiction. The book by Chris, I can't remember his last name, the Canadian astronaut who became
Chris Hadfield.
That's it. He wrote a book called Apollo 18.
Yeah.
Where what happens is the command module going on a routine visit to the moon is detoured to a Russian space station. I've only got that far. It's a thick book, trust me. Chris wrote a big book. But again, it could have only have happened because the Russians adopted the American docking standard. It's a universal docking system. Even India has it on its proposed manned capsule. So in an emergency, they can dock to the ISS if they have to.
In fact, I think that's what they even call it, a universal docking adapter or something like that.
It also, to be honest, it's the only thing that would make sense to me. It's like a universal, charging for phones or anything else. They have to be. What's the point in having all the different ones? But I mean, that's just me thinking like a girl. We should all just work together and get everything the same.
Oh well, NASA's got the tricorder pretty much licked already, so I think the universal translator is next.
Can't wait.
I just thought of one interesting story, interesting to me, when I was preparing for my STEM panel. Actually, we did this, it was the 20th anniversary of the shuttle Columbia accident. And they built a museum in East Texas where most of the debris and all 7 of the bodies landed, actually. And it's a really nice museum. And so again, they asked the NASA Alumni League to come participate in a big 3-day event there. I won't say a celebration, but a remembrance of it. And so I went, and again was one of the panels. And so the panel was called Making STEM for Everyone. And anyway, so again, doing a little research for my panel, I learned that when STEM became a thing, it originally was SMET, S-M-E-T. They had, when it first started, it was science, math, engineering, and technology. And there was at least the story I've heard was that it was a woman at the National Science Foundation or something like that in the US. And she said, guys, SMET sounds an awful lot like smut. Maybe we could just rearrange the letters and make it STEM instead of SMET. And so that's how STEM actually, became a thing.
Yeah, she was right, I think.
But it's nice how these things come out of the past, really, because everybody has to build on, we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Mhm.
And it's those giants that allow us to take the next step, whether, no matter what the discipline is, even in biological research, medical, astronomy, physics. But the people that came before gave us the playing field in order to build further and take it to the next level. And I think having a program specifically for kids like STEM, it gives them, if anything, a real head start to become the next generation of giants who will be providing the playing field to build on.
Well, and I've seen it and heard it so many times about it. It just takes that one little interaction, or with a 8-year-old remembers when an astronaut came to their school and it sparked something, and 20 years later they're an astronaut. I mean, that's a unusual example maybe, but all very similar things like that I've seen. They're just oh wow, I could do that, or oh, that's kind of interesting, or I think maybe I mean, and again, 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah,
sometimes, and so that's one of the reasons I love doing things like this too. I do a lot of podcasts that are just the audience are children.
Yeah.
And whether it sparks them or not, again, I can think all it takes is one. And
the encouragement at a young age, and you're right, it only takes one, but I mean, it could be 2, could be 10 in one group, and I just from my own experience, if you have that little spark in you from a young age, it continues, and it does burn into a fire. So I mean, the more encouragement, and kids are like sponges, so I mean, even if they don't go ahead with further, they will remember that.
Yeah, I've done a lot of presentations to third graders. I tried one. It was actually a military base, and there were a lot of kids, or even I think maybe kindergarten, first and second grade, and that just didn't work. After about 10 or 15 minutes, the parents in the room, the kids just couldn't stay still or pay attention, and I said, let's try it again another time. But I've probably spoken to several hundred third graders over the last 5 or 6 years, and they are just wide eyes and interested and asking questions, and it's almost kind of surprising to me how that seems, in my experience, to go from that jump from first to second grade to third grade is huge.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is an area NASA was very, very good at in the Apollo era, because they would send the astronauts out on to visit schools, talk about the space program. And I remember, I think most of us have seen From the Earth to the Moon. Most of us even got a copy of it. But I recollect where there was a young astronaut who was yet to fly. He was in the school. He was showing a movie, and the way they put across the various technical stuff, they used Woody Woodpecker and Chilly Willy. Well, literally, Woody would fly in his rocket and stop, come the screeching halt over the moon, and it says, "This is where we have to go down to the moon." And then the spacecraft, through two old mountain boy heads, talking to each other, one would go down, come back up, and then they would do they would dock and do everything that way. And they would use, this is what they call vehicular activity, and it would be Chilly Willy going out to the airlock, being boosted out the airlock, and he would be freezing, and he'd thumb a taxi. But that worked. It was a really good way to get not only the kids' attention, but the adults. Even the adults appreciated it. Talk to them on a same level. And in a lot of ways, it kept it simple, but not insultingly simple, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, actually, the most recent podcast I did was just it is for the podcast is called Solve It for Kids.
This is the Space Guppies,
Yeah.
the Space Guppy podcast. Yeah, I listened to it. It's wonderful.
Oh, okay. Yes. So, yeah, no, that's right. Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed that because I got to be involved in acquiring the Super Guppy back in 1997. And actually, the interesting story about that is I got to go to the, I don't know if you know what a NASA social is. Whenever they're having a launch or an event somewhere, they will invite non-NASA people or non-traditional journalists, they call them, librarians and doctors and you name it, and invite them. They don't pay for the travel or room and board and such, but if you can make it to the Kennedy Space Center for the launch or the Johnson Space Center or whatever, you will get special badging and access to these kind of things. And so anyway, when they made the announcement of the Artemis 2 crew here in Houston back it was a few months ago, they had a NASA social. So there were a group of about 30 or 40 people from all over the country who were here in town for that. And I knew a few of them. And of course, because I'm an officer in the Alumni League Board of Directors, I was given an invitation to this by invitation only event. And so it happened that I met, as part of that NASA social group, was a woman who's an author of kids' books. And so we interacted a bit during that time. And she said, "Hey, I've got this podcast called Solve It for Kids. Would you like to come on and be a guest?" I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." And so it was actually her idea. We were throwing around ideas about what to talk about, and I said something about, well, I did a fair amount of work with aircraft and Super Guppy. It's a Super Guppy. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, so that's how that all came about. But yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I think the fact that social media has been so effectively taken on board is going to really help, particularly getting people on board literally with the continued exploration of space. Without it, you've got demagogues who say, well, our tax dollars are better spent at home. Yeah. Well, what they've got to remember is those tax dollars spent in space come back 2, 3, or 4 times as much more in the trickle down, because the technology the tax dollars created comes back to Earth to be used on Earth.
Well, and of course, the other thing is the dollars aren't actually spent in space. They're spent here on the ground, right? Yeah. Those are people's jobs and livelihood, and so that I always find that argument a little bit, we're spending too much money in space. No, we're not spending $1 in space. Yeah.
Well,
and yeah, you're right. It comes back in multiple.
It's an investment in space. It's an investment in Earth, on anything that goes into space, because it's all coming back here, as you say, trickle down. Yeah. A huge amount of the stuff that we use daily is just because of space. I think people maybe see money spent and they don't realize the kind of what they're getting back for what's been spent,
Definitely.
One example, again, I have to go back to the Apollo era. How do you make spacesuit gloves? How do you make spacesuits? Well, you need seamstresses. So the US at the time was actually in a recession, and the space program turned the recession around because all these people who were originally being laid off were suddenly coming into the space program. They were making the gloves. In fact, ironically, people who made the gloves for the spacesuits were from the garment district of New York City. They were normally making bras for women.
Yes, that's right. And
they could stitch the fabric in such a way it wasn't damaged by the thread. Yeah. They were seen by the space program. This is great. Yeah. You could, and that is how we had the space gloves and the space suits made. Yeah. Otherwise, we would just go, we can go up, but we can't get outside the rocket. But we used a non-space skill set to allow extravehicular activity to happen.
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with some of the women who've sewed those Apollo spacesuits, and they were talking about how, you know, after they would finish a suit, the suits were taken to a hospital and x-rayed to make sure that there weren't any pins accidentally left in the material where they could puncture and cause a problem. Yeah.
There's your answer. You want to see people put into work, push the space program forward, because there is lots and lots of work needed on Earth in various unimaginable disciplines in order to do it. You don't know what your company's doing. You're making a part.
Yeah.
And I suppose the analog would be, okay, this is a Star Wars analog, the Andor series, where they're making a part in the prison. That part was actually for the Death Star, but they didn't know what it was. And it's the same, nobody really knew back in that day what they were building. In fact, even now, with the modern spacesuits that Axiom have built for Artemis and for the Dragon X, the Dragon capsules, it's not, they won't discuss exactly the technology in it, because it is a by far more advanced system. It's a lot lighter, it's a lot more flexible, compared to the Apollo suits, and definitely compared to the spacesuits they use on the ISS today. So every so on, you get a quantum leap in the technology. The medical technology that's incorporated into those suits to monitor an astronaut in space is so far ahead of what we had back then. Back in Mercury's day, because they knew you weren't going to get out of the capsule, you were going to do a suborbital flight, you wore a standard pressure suit. That was the be and all. And then as things ramped up, they knew they had to do EVA. Then they had to figure out a way. We have to build a suit that will stand up. It'll keep an astronaut warm, but space and the cold out. And it happens. So today, companies like Axiom are building on the Apollo technology, on the ISS technology, to give us the suits for the future. And perhaps eventually those suits will actually be on Mars. They'll lighten them even more to make them easier, make it easier to walk around outside of a habitat on Mars. And that is the whole point of going to the moon. We need the minerals on the moon. We have tons of water locked up in the regolith, particularly at the lunar poles. And it's a very safe, well, it's a safer place to learn, a safer place to test the systems. And in reality, again, brings us back full circle to Skylab. All the systems we had that we tested on Skylab went to things like the ISS. They're going to go to CIS. They're going to go to the moon, and eventually onto Mars. It's literally, in some respects, it's old technology. It works. We know it does. We just build it. We make it better. Kind of like making a bionic man. We'll make it faster and better and quicker. Steve Austin, eat your heart out. But science fiction today, science fiction yesterday became science fact today.
Yes, absolutely agree.
Talks about geostationary satellites. Again, it's a very important part of going into space, being able to communicate. The Russians proved that with amateur radio on the ISS when those ISS transmitters broke down. They used phone patches using 2-meter amateur radio to speak to Moscow and to speak to NASA. That's why, yet again, all the astronauts now have amateur radio licenses. Apart from that, it's a really good way to talk to the kids and enthuse the kids. Amateur radio in space is a way to get kids fired up in STEM, because they can talk to a real life astronaut who is hurtling around the Earth, and you can literally get an idea of what it's like. I hope, I don't know if Orion has amateur radio on board at the moment. I know the shuttle did, because when I lived in the States, I could go onto the Cape Kennedy Space Center repeater via Echolink, and it was only available to listen to during a shuttle launch because 2-meter amateur radio was their backup. And I guess if you're giving us, if astronauts are still getting ham licenses or already hams and being asked to take amateur radio into space even more, it would say that this is a very, very good way to really move STEM forward. I know most schools fight to get an ASS contact today.
There was a school there last month. We actually did a write-up on it in the Astronomy Ireland magazine that got contact from the ISS, and it was live and it was recorded, and the children's faces and just the fascination was fantastic. And it was on the amateur radio, but it was just fantastic. And again, I think there was people fighting to be next. But things like that, you're going to get the kids interested, you're going to get the kids excited, and then even to watch the actual video of it was wonderful. You know, so it's a great thing to see.
STEM is the way forward. No matter where you live on this planet, STEM is now one of the most important educational programs we have. Because, to be honest, they say there is no planet B. Well, there isn't. There is and there isn't. However, there's always the orbital habitats. And because of Skylab, Mir, I don't remember what the Chinese one is, and I'm not going to risk pronouncing it to get it wrong. The ISS and the CIS and the planned replacement for the ISS that NASA is looking at the moment is because it is going to be our future home. And it offers medical benefits to elderly people. It's a lot less strain on your heart. If you've got heart trouble, they can send you to an orbital habitat at maybe 0.25 G, and your heart can then continue to pump okay, and you'll still have a nice, long, happy life. Maybe that is the future of orbital
that's
habitat.
the retirement homes. I've heard of this. I've read about this as well. I mean,
again, if it wasn't for Skylab, if it wasn't for Apollo or Gemini, we wouldn't have that possibility. And yes, I think the fact that now more and more countries are investing in space. Most countries now have a space agency of their own. They work internationally. Projects like the ISS are seen as an important international collaboration. And that I think really came about because of people like Gene Kranz and their generation. We said, how are we going to do it? It says, we will do it. Chris Kraft, failure is not an option. No matter what is thrown at us, we will figure it out and we will get it done, and we will either get them home or they will be able to continue their mission as required. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons we have learned. Failure is not an option. All failure does is tells you what we did wrong and what we're going to do to fix it.
Exactly.
Sorry. I am very much somebody who believes in the space program, and I believe as an astronomer, space is a great place to be. If we had kept Apollo going to Apollo 20, if the shuttle had come in on time, I think we would have had observatories on the moon by now, both optical and radio. I think Moonbase Alpha would have happened. And it always amuses me. Science fiction tells us what we're reaching for. And then back on Earth, people, even like yourself, especially people like yourself, make it happen. You work for NASA in the business side of it. Your job was to make it happen. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get people to come on board for the journey?
Herb, do you ever look back and go, how did I do all that? Like literally, Because I mean, I've heard so many of your stories are wonderful, and I'm like, how did you do that? Do you ever look back yourself and go, God, how did we get that managed? Or I'm sure there was many deadlines you couldn't get to, and there was many meetings that were very stressful, and you still did it, you know.
Well, yeah, no, exactly that. You know, I've thought many times I can't imagine any job on Earth. That's funny to say, that I would have loved or enjoyed more than working for NASA. Having said that, there were some days that were very difficult and frustrating. And how am I going to do this? But you know, that's why would you want anything else, really?
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I remember also the last 6 months of my career. I knew about that time. I'm going to retire in about 6 months or so, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe I'll kind of, you know, ease into the retirement, you know, and kind of take it easy, because I was going to retire like January 1st. So the last few weeks, in fact, are like Christmas holidays, you know, nobody's working anyway. And it turned out to be almost just the opposite. You know, my director gave me a special project to do, and the center director, Ellen Ochoa, also gave me a special assignment to do the last couple of months, you know, working directly with her. And then the last week, because one of the things I did very often, because they gave me special access that even most other NASA employees didn't have, to mission control and the space vehicle mock-up facility and the neutral buoyancy lab, because I had so much history and knowledge and was supporting flight operations, that they asked me to do a lot of tours for people. People would come in from other NASA centers who had never been to Johnson Space Center. Or I remember one time an author came in and they asked me to give him a tour of the NBL and the mock-up facility and mission control. And so I ended up doing a lot of tours, and for friends and family too, not just, you know, NASA guests. And so my last week, which was that week between Christmas and New Year's, when there was no work going on, and normally I would have been taking, you know, vacation time, I was saving my time. And so I ended up doing 2 tours each day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon for my last. So I did 10 tours my last 5 days there. Everybody trying to get, you know, can you squeeze me in? You know, because when I retired, I had to give up my coded badge that gave me access to all of those places. And so now when somebody contacts me, I give them a personal guided tour of Space Center Houston, which is the official visitor center right next door. But I can go to NASA myself I have a retiree's badge that allows me access, but I can't take anyone with me like I could before. But,
I'm sure they probably know your face at the door anyway.
It's funny because I still recognize, you know, we have to stop at the guard gate there and show our badge, and I still recognize a lot of the same, you know, security guys that were there. And I've been retired for 6 years now. But anyway, all that to say, you know, it was up until the last month or weeks, you know, it was interesting and exciting and challenging, and I just loved every minute of it. I almost hated to leave, but it was time to let someone else have some of that fun.
Yeah. And your book, your book, you think you might be finished towards the end of this year. So, I mean, there's another big thing to look forward to.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but Herb has a model of the LEM on a command capsule in the corner picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great background you have. Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite models. Of course, I have 2 shuttle models too.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, so one of the first things I did, I started working at NASA in the mid-70s, and by 1979 they had assigned me to the business office that was buying the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. And you know, there was a multi-billion-dollar contract to build the orbiter vehicles, and then the contracts for the main engines and the external tank were a different company, and a different company for the solid rocket boosters. But the company that built the shuttle orbiters gave me this as a, you know, just kind of a thank you. this
Yeah.
Rockwell National. And so one of the reasons I love this is because, of course, you recognize that the external tank is white.
Yes.
And it was only white on the first two missions. They painted it white, thinking they needed to protect the super cool liquid oxygen and hydrogen from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. But it turned out they didn't. And so after the first two missions, they just left it its natural orange color, and they saved 600 pounds of paint by not painting it.
That's a lot.
So anyway, this is I love this model almost as much as I
Yeah.
do my Apollo model.
Yeah.
Of course, Gene Roddenberry, DeForest Kelly, Leonard Nimoy, and Jimmy Doohan got to meet their namesake spacecraft, the USS Enterprise, the space shuttle.
Yeah.
That was on the ground.
Yeah.
So that was a big day in reality. We actually took another step towards the Star Trek future, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures, some photos of that that gathering that day. Yeah, that's very cool.
Very cool.
I think it was very nice because I think most of us, if we're really honest, it was Star Trek that got us into astronomy, into space, into wanting to be astronauts and stuff. We saw how cool it was to be Captain Kirk zipping around the universe. So we knew we had to put the academics in order to get it. And of course, in reality, Star Trek has kept the interest going.
Yes.
A lot of cases, particularly, I know that everybody, quite a few people didn't like Enterprise, the series, but I thought that the homage that they paid to NASA in the actual intro graphics was really, really nice, because they covered pretty much everything from the Saturns right the way through to the man landing and slightly beyond. Because after well, theoretically, they were guessing after a certain point, because the only thing they knew for sure was the shuttle.
Yeah.
And that was where they stopped. But it was one of those lovely things, a thank you, because most of the engineers of both sexes really got it because of Star Trek. I listened to an interview with Gene Roddenberry, and they asked him how he felt because he had done this, and he said, "I didn't set out to do this. I set out to make Wagon Train Goes to the Stars, and yet I've enthused countless generations, multiple generations now, who want to take that step into the final frontier." And it was nice.
Yeah. Nice. It's one thing word first.
Yeah. If it wasn't for that, a lot of the great thinkers, a lot of the great engineers probably wouldn't have been as interested in space as they are today.
Yeah. But again, as you say, Star Trek for a lot of people, but I mean, the STEM missions are doing this now. The STEM program is doing this. It's going to spark interest. It's going to spark young minds. It's going to spark, it's going to spark our future, and which it's actually doing right now. And again, it's wonderful that you're involved with that, Herb. Like, it's just, I think there's endless possibilities with STEM as well. I don't think anybody is running out of things to do with the younger children and the teenagers, and just the encouragement to give them, which I think anybody who's interested in space just loves to give encouragement to anybody else, but especially the younger generation, to literally see us all go further on.
Yep.
Anywhere else you want to go, Susan?
No, that's sorry, just being a statement.
Any other stories you want to tell her?
No, I think that's probably enough for today. but hey, another year or so, I would be more than happy to come back and catch you up to date. Hopefully, maybe my book will be published by then, and
yeah.
Because I was thinking, oh gosh, I don't even remember what I talked about on our last session. But then I thought, well, most of the things I can talk about now happened since then anyway.
Yeah.
And hopefully my next year or so will be, just as full of new adventures and new people and new things I've been able to do. And so, yeah.
With your involvement in STEM, yes, there's going to be an awful lot more to tell us in a year's time.
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, people like yourself are continuing to give your expertise and your enthusiasm to the oncoming generations. And without that, we won't get anywhere, because we won't have the desire or the wish to do it. It's, I think STEM has been a very, very positive thing. And in education alone, it's helped a lot of kids just go from, oh, I'm just going to mooch through school and get my certificate. So, hey, I can actually affect the future.
Yeah.
I don't need a DeLorean time machine. I can do it here and now. So, yeah, well done. So, I'm going to give you this round of applause because you are an unsung hero of the space program, and your enthusiasm with the younger generations will keep humanity pushing further out, I think.
Well, thank you. Yeah, certainly not just me, so many of my friends. And, you know, one of the things I love about the NASA Alumni League is lots of other folks just like me have doing the same thing with the same interest. And I love, you know, still getting to be around them and see them and work with them.
Yeah.
Well, touch wood. I hope to be back in the States for Artemis 3.
Oh.
So I am going to talk to a few people, see if I can get press accreditation. And I'm going to come down to the Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah, for Artemis 3, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Artemis 2 is 2024.
Yeah.
And that's next year.
Yeah.
So it's going to be pushing it, because I normally come back every other year to see my daughter in upstate New York. So hopefully, you know, if we're looking at the spacings that they're talking about, and Artemis 3 being the return to the moon, then that's the one I'm planning to be there for the launch.
Yeah. That's going to be a big one.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a very, very good one.
Okay, well, I hope you make it.
Oh, I hope so too.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to say thank you very much for coming back, Herb. We'll look forward to seeing you again in a year's time.
Yeah.
Lots more stories, lots more STEM.
Yeah.
Honestly, Herb, it's absolutely been an honor to have you, and I really appreciate you coming on. And again, I'll just be sitting here fangirling all over you. So thank you so much.
Oh,
really
you're welcome.
appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I love chatting with you guys, and thank you for inviting me back.
Wonderful. This time next year.
Okay.
All that remains of me today is thank you, Pico, for your intro and outro music, and take it away. So 3, 2, 1.